y'all, Dixie here. Today I want to talk to you about some more of my dumbest mistakes. I've got 2 other videos highlighting some other dumb mistakes. I'll link to those in the video description if you want to check them out, but let's get started. One of my first mistakes that I can think back to is not knowing how to use gear I took backpacking with me. This started with my first ever backpacking trip, which was a through hike of the Appalachian Trail. And when I got to Springer Mountain Shelter the first night, I didn't know how to use my stove. I had never tried it before. And also I had never used my hammock. Somehow in all this dreaming of wanting to through hike the Appalachian Trail and go on a 6-month trip, I failed to actually test out the gear that I was going to be carrying with me. But I did research it a lot and read a lot of reviews, but it would have been much better to have actually tested that stuff out at a minimum in my backyard before I got to the trail and actually had to rely on these things to function properly. My stove wasn't that difficult to figure out. It was pretty straightforward, but I am glad that it came out of the box actually working. I mean, otherwise I would have just used the fire. But the shelter was kind of a bigger deal, and thankfully the AT is so well trafficked that they have actual 3-sided shelter structures up on trail. And I was going to be camping at one that night, but there was a big storm coming, so thankfully I was able to ditch out in it and stay for the night instead, because my first night on a backpacking trip in a shelter that I had never used, meaning my hammock, that would have probably been a disaster. And I ended up switching from the hammock to a tent in my first town stop anyway, because it was kind of a disaster anyway. So you would think that I would have learned my lesson from that, but unfortunately 2 years later, when I started my through hike of the Pacific Crest Trail, I had to have an ice axe for the Sierra Nevada section, and I didn't know how to use an ice axe to self-arrest and save my life, which was the whole purpose of toting it to begin with. To be fair to myself, it wasn't like I could practice in the snow in my backyard in Alabama, but I could have at least watched some YouTube videos to try to learn how to do it and then practice on snow out there on the trail. But it worked out. We ended up running into some people out on trail who were able to show us how to properly self-arrest and then watch us practice a little bit. But definitely try to do as I say, not as I do, and know how to use your gear before you need to rely on it. The next dumb mistake I want to address is night hiking in the water in Florida. It seems like I've got some kind of theme going here, because in the first dumb mistakes video I had night hiking in rugged terrain, and in the second dumb mistakes video I had night hiking in grizzly country, and now this video I have night hiking in the Florida swamps. Anyway, on the Florida Trail there were a couple of times where I had some bad planning, and it makes sense to night hike on the Florida Trail, especially if you get COVID around the time you're supposed to start and you have to delay your trip and now you're going into the hotter months. Night hiking helps you escape the heat of the day. But I thought when we hit the Bradwell Bay section that once you get through the thick of the jungle gym of the Bradwell Bay, that magically the water would dry up and it would be dry terrain and I could camp there. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case, and so I was still slogging through all of the water when the sun went down. Now, water moccasins are hard enough to see in the middle of the day, let alone at night while you're trying to night hike with a headlamp. And there was another part of the Florida Trail where I was night hiking and it wasn't too swampy, but there ended up being a water crossing, and it was right after seeing some gator eyes glowing in the dark. So that was a little unnerving, having to cross into some deep waters where there were some gator eyes. Both of these situations could have been mitigated with better planning. If I had looked ahead and paid more attention, I would have seen some of the comments in the Far Out app telling me, you know, hey, you're gonna have a water crossing that's pretty deep, or hey, you're still going to be in the swamp once you get out of the thick of the Bradwell Bay. Another mistake I made in regards to the Florida Trail is not treating my gear with permethrin before I went out there. I'm somebody who doesn't really like to use bug spray. I don't like putting poisons on my gear. But the Florida Trail is a different beast than some of the other trails I've been on. You are there to begin with in the Everglades. I definitely saw a ton of mosquitoes and ticks. You can certainly get sick from mosquito bites if it's the wrong mosquito, but ticks are known to carry all sorts of things like Lyme disease, and then you got the Lone Star ticks that'll make you allergic to red meat. So in this particular situation, I think it would have made more sense to reduce my risk of being bitten by a tick that was carrying something icky. I could have at a minimum treated my shoes and my pack, but you can also treat things like your clothing or your shelter if you want to. I personally don't really want to sleep up in something that's been sprayed with poison, but definitely I could have done a little bit more than I did, which was nothing, and then I ended up using bug spray anyway. The next mistake is one of my bigger regrets, and that is not taking proper care of my skin when I first started backpacking. Our skin is our biggest organ. It's delicate and it's worth protecting, and especially in areas like the Sierra Nevada and New Mexico, where I was hiking in shorts and then my legs were getting kind of leathery. I really got my final wake-up call when I had a precancerous spot on my face that I ended up having to get frozen off, and that's when I was like, all right, enough of that. I'm gonna start taking better care of my skin. And I feel like, oh my gosh, it's too late. But my dermatologist has reassured me it is never too late to start taking proper care of your skin. You should start now if you never have before. So some ways that you can take proper care of your skin are to wear a hat, keep the sun off of your face and your scalp. Sun gloves, I have definitely noticed that my hands are more wrinkly and dry looking than they used to be. An umbrella is not only good for the rain, but also to keep heat off of you and the sun's harmful rays. Long pants or leggings to protect the skin on your legs, and also long sleeve tops. Sunscreen, I prefer to wear the physical sunscreen more than the chemical one, but to each his own. And I also like to have some sort of moisturizer, like a little mini lotion or something. That way I'm hydrating my skin at night after it has, despite all my best efforts, still gotten some sun exposure during the day. And finally, another one of my dumb mistakes was not hiking with a personal locator beacon or some sort of satellite device. Before I started my first thru hike of the Appalachian Trail, I read about personal locator beacons and the spot devices and the inReaches, and I thought, I don't need that. I'm gonna be just fine. That's for people who are just overly paranoid, and I kind of felt a little too prideful for that. Well, that's just really ignorant, and there is no place for pride in the backcountry. No. Well, that came up with a quickness. Anyway, if you have the means financially, and even if it takes a little while to save up, I think having a personal locator beacon that you just one-time use can push a button for SOS and get some help if you need it. Having a spot device where you can send pre-programmed messages and also have the SOS button, or an inReach where you can two-way message. Any of those things are worth their weight in gold if you're in a troubling situation or if you're lost. And I started thinking about it, not only is it important for my life, and life is such a precious and delicate thing, but also, what if I'm in the backcountry and I have the ability to help somebody else who is in distress, and I could save their life by just having this device on me? So I decided once I was spending more time in the backcountry that it was definitely worth it. On the Pacific Crest Trail, I carried a one-time use personal locator beacon, and then after having some sketchy situations in the Sierra Nevada and wishing that I could message my mom and say, hey, don't freak out, but I'm actually going to take 8 days through this stretch instead of 6, but everything's okay. Just being able to give her that peace of mind and not rush myself worrying about worrying her was definitely worth the cost to me of getting the inReach, which I decided to carry with me on the Continental Divide Trail. Going forward, I will never go on a backpacking trip and not have some sort of device where I can call for help for myself or somebody else. I just feel like it's a silly gamble to not have one. So those are some of the dumb mistakes that I've reflected back on, and I think it's important to look back on where we've come from and what we've learned, because that's how we can be better going forward. If any of y'all have dumb mistakes that you'd like to share, please feel free to leave those in the comments, so hopefully somebody can learn from you, not the hard way. All right, well, thank y'all so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe before you go, and we will see y'all next time.